Given the unwillingness and inability of Republicans to get a speaker of their own across the finish line, have you all started to talk about what you would demand from Republicans in exchange for votes to help them elect a speaker?
Short answer is no. At the end of the day, all we are asking Republicans to do is to figure out a way for themselves to organize so the Congress can get together and do the business of the American people. Tip O'Neill got along with Ronald Reagan. Ted Kennedy got along with Orrin Hatch. Joe Biden got along with John McCain. Nancy Pelosi got along with John Boehner. Ruth Bader Ginsburg got along with Antonin Scalia. All we are asking is House Republicans to get along with each other so we can get about the business of the American people.
The tellers agree in their tallies that the total number of votes cast is 431, of which the Honorable Kevin McCarthy of the state of California has received 213. The Honorable Hakeem Jeffries of the state of New York has received 211. The Honorable Jim Jordan of the state of Ohio has received 4. The Honorable Kevin Hern of the state of Oklahoma has received 3. No member-elect having received a majority of the votes cast, a speaker has not been elected. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Gentleman's recognized.
I'd like to yield 1 minute to the distinguished minority leader, Mr. Jeffries from New York.
Thank the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Maryland for his tremendous leadership. I rise today in opposition to the amendment as well as to the underlying bill, the so-called RAIN Act, which is not really designed to do anything meaningful in terms of addressing the economic concerns of the American people. And that's consistent with the fact that over the last 2 months of this extreme MAGA Republican majority, they've been focused on doing anything but dealing with the real kitchen table, pocketbook concerns of the American people. Over the last year or so, all we heard was that this extreme MAGA Republican majority was going to try to address the economic concerns of everyday Americans. And so we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the big, grand Republican plan. Waiting for it. Notwithstanding the fact that President Biden's administration has done a tremendous job pulling us out of a once-in-a-century pandemic, and in partnership with Democrats through the American Rescue Plan, saved the economy from a deep recession, put shots in arms, money in pockets, kids back in school, invested in the infrastructure of this country, which will create millions of good-paying jobs, passed the CHIPS and Science Act to bring domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America, passed the Inflation Reduction Act to strike a dramatic blow against the climate crisis, set our planet on a sustainable trajectory forward, strengthen the Affordable Care Act, lower health care costs, drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs for millions of Americans, including many on insulin, which will now be reduced to $35 a month. That's the economic record of this administration 112 million good-paying jobs created over the last 2 years, record unemployment. Yes, we still have challenges that we need to address as we try to emerge from this inflationary environment that has afflicted the entire world. But oh, by the way, the United States economy has emerged from COVID in a better position than any other developed country because of the Biden economic plan and the partnership with House Democrats and Senate Democrats. But we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the grand Republican plan. And here it is, the so-called RAIN Act. 3 pages. 3 pages. What does it call for? Reports. Reports. It's the grand Republican economic plan. Why? Because you've been focused on the wrong things. Now, House Democrats, we're going to continue to invest in the American people. Invest in education and job training. Invest in transportation and infrastructure. Invest in research and development. Invest in technology and innovation. Invest in the creation and preservation of affordable housing. Invest in the health, the safety, the economic well-being of the American people. That's our plan. We're going to continue to put people over politics. And we get 3 pages calling for reports. The so-called Rein In Act. Here's what we should be reining in. We should be reining in the extreme MAGA Republican effort to cut Social Security. We should rein in the extreme MAGA Republican effort to cut Medicare. Rein in the extreme MAGA Republican effort to criminalize reproductive freedom and impose a nationwide ban. Rein in the extreme MAGA Republican effort to crash the United States economy and default on our debt for the first time in American history. We should be reining in your effort to hand over sensitive security footage from the January 6th violent insurrection to an avowed conspiracy theorist. That's what we should be reining in. 3-page plan calling for reports. It's not a serious effort to address the challenges facing the American people, but we will continue to be serious about putting people over politics, fighting for lower costs, fighting for better paying jobs, fighting for safer communities, fighting for reproductive freedom, and defending our democracy at all costs. I yield back.
Back to the video footage for a second, and just talking to your Democratic colleagues, I think it's fair to say that they don't have a lot of confidence that Tucker Carlson is going to formulate a narrative that is fair and objective. With that in mind, are you planning any kind of strategy to respond, any kind of fact check to respond in real time as this footage is aired, understanding that we don't know when or what it's going to show?
Well, the January 6th a select committee did a tremendous job of explaining to the American people what happened on that fateful day during the violent insurrection, why it happened, and has laid out some paths in terms of how we as a country might come together to prevent that type of political attack on the Congress, the country, and the Constitution from ever happening again. And so we'll see where it goes. But we are in conversation with each other as House Democrats, led by, of course, the members of the January 6th committee and the members of the House Administration Committee.
So is it your position that the January 6th committee offered a complete picture of what happened on January 6th, or do you think that more could be shown?
The January 6th committee presented an incredibly comprehensive and thorough picture of what happened on January 6th using a variety of different means, including, yes, video footage, but perhaps even more significantly, the narrative of January 6th was told through the lens of Donald Trump's closest allies who were part of his administration, who revealed what happened in terms of leading up to the violent insurrection, and also the failure of former President Trump to do anything meaningful to stop it. That story was told, it's in the public record, and it was done in a tremendous way and in a bipartisan way by the members of the January 6th Select Committee. Yeah, second row. We haven't had a recent conversation with respect to the debt ceiling. I think he understands that my position on this matter is clear. We need to raise the debt ceiling because we have a responsibility as a Congress to pay bills that have already been incurred, that Congress has already signed off on, to avoid the catastrophic economic consequences that could result from a default on our nation's debt for the first time in American history, which will adversely impact everyday Americans in every way possible. A default on our debt, or even threatening to default, is going to cost the American people individually and as families, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars as a result of increased interest in terms of credit card payments, mortgage payments, student loan debt payments, and in other areas that would clearly do grave damage to the people who we should be protecting here in Washington. Now, as I've mentioned repeatedly, in terms of the relationship with Speaker McCarthy, it's been a positive, forward-looking relationship with a consistency to it in terms of discussing matters that are before the House of Representatives and trying to find common ground whenever and wherever possible in the best interest of the American people.
Does the gentleman yield 1 minute?
Long 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Neal, for your extraordinary leadership and continuing to work to elevate values that benefit everyday Americans. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the extreme MAGA Republican Default on America Act. This reckless Republican effort to lead us down the road of a dangerous default will hurt working families, hurt the middle class, hurt all those Americans who aspire to be part of the middle class, hurt young people, hurt seniors, hurt veterans, hurt the poor, the sick, and the afflicted, hurt people in urban America, in rural America, in exurban America, in small-town America, in Appalachia, in the heartland of America, hurt the least, the lost, and the left behind. The extreme MAGA Republican Default on America Act will hurt everyday Americans. Why? Because you want to jam your reckless, extreme ideology down the throats of the American people in a hostage-taking situation. Instead of producing a budget, that's what President Biden has done. You've produced a ransom note. The Default on America Act is a ransom note because effectively what you are saying is pass our extreme MAGA Republican bill or else America is going to default. Now we have a responsibility here in the United States Congress to uphold the full faith and credit of the United States of America, to make sure that as a country we pay our bills, bills that have already been incurred, not default. And that's what our responsibility is, not as Democrats or as Republicans, as Americans. That's why in the previous administration, Democrats 3 times worked with the Trump administration to avoid a default. No gamesmanship, no brinksmanship, no partisanship. Work with the previous administration, to which we disagreed often, to make sure that America paid its bills, notwithstanding the fact that in our 247-year history, 25% of America's debt was accumulated during the 4 years of the Trump administration. But we did our patriotic responsibility to make sure that America would not default on our debt. But now, with a different president in office, you want to play games. You want to flirt with a default. Take us down this dangerous path. And you claim it's all about fiscal responsibility. Give me a break. That's rhetoric. That's not what the record shows. As Mr. Neal articulated, this is not about fiscal responsibility. That's rhetoric. What the record shows is that Democrats are the party of job creation and fiscal responsibility, and Republicans have been the party of tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and exploding deficits. Bill Clinton inherited deficits from the previous two administrations. 20 million good-paying jobs were created during the 8 years of the Clinton presidency, and he eliminated the deficit. In fact, he created a budget surplus. President Barack Obama inherited the Great Recession, fiscal irresponsibility, and 14 million good-paying private sector jobs were created during the presidency of Barack Obama, and he reduced the deficit by $1 trillion, took it from 1.5 trillion to 500 billion. Democrats, the party of job creation and fiscal responsibility. Joe Biden inherited a mess. And what did he do? In 2 years, more than 10 million jobs created. Now that number, over 12 million. And reduced the deficit by $1.7 trillion. What's the Republican record? Why do you lecture America about fiscal responsibility? Mr. Speaker, what is the Republican record? President Reagan comes into office, and the first thing that he does is massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and explodes the deficit. President George W. Bush comes into office, 2001, 2003, massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, 2 failed wars, a deep recession, explodes the deficit. President Trump comes into office. First thing he does in 2017, massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. The GOP tax scam. 83% of the benefits going to the wealthiest 1% in America, explodes the deficits. How dare you lecture America about fiscal responsibility when the record shows that Democrats are the party of job creation and reducing deficits, and Republicans are the party of tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected, and exploding the deficit. So we're not going to stand here and allow you to lecture us about fiscal responsibility. What this is an effort to try to extract deep, painful cuts on everyday Americans. There's a process for America to pay its bills. It should be seamless. And then there's a budget process and an appropriations process. That's where we can have a conversation about future spending, future investments. What should the priorities be? President Joe Biden produced a budget. His budget will actually protect and strengthen Social Security, build an economy that works for everyday Americans, and cut the deficit by $3 trillion. We've been asking for a Republican budget. Instead of you giving us a budget, you've given us a ransom note. That's what the Default on America Act is. threatening a dangerous default. Pass it or else. That's not statesmanship, that's brinksmanship. And it will cause grave harm to everyday Americans. The reckless Republican, extreme MAGA Republican, dangerous default effort risks triggering a painful recession that will cost millions of good-paying jobs. This reckless Republican effort, this effort to lead us down a dangerous default, will risk crashing the stock market and put in jeopardy the retirement security of millions of older Americans. This reckless Republican effort to lead us down a dangerous default risks exploding costs for everyday Americans. That's what's in front of us right now. That's why we oppose this reckless effort to default on America. This bill is unacceptable, it's unreasonable, it's unworkable, it's unconscionable, and it's un-American. That's why we oppose it. That's why we're urging vote no. And that's why we're asking you to come together, not as Republicans, but as Americans, to do what has always been done and make sure America pays bills that have already been incurred and avoid a dangerous default. I yield back.
Chair would like to remind members to, in the interest of the proper decorum in the House, to address the chair.
Thank you, Congressman. Just circling back to George Santos, what message is Kevin McCarthy sending to the American people by refusing to demand Santos's resignation?
Well, listen, I respect Speaker McCarthy, and I respect his position relative to his articulation of the appropriate response to the indictment. Before the indictment, I've made clear that George Santos is not fit to serve in the United States House of Representatives. And the American people share that opinion as well, including the overwhelming majority of the people in the 3rd Congressional District in New York. And so I think this is a question for the House Republican Conference in its entirety to decide. Who are you? Who are you? Are you the grand old party? Are you the party that puts guns over people? Are you the party of George Santos and Marjorie Taylor Greene? Are you the party that will continue to bend the knee to the insurrectionists in chief? Who are you? These are questions that I think the American people should be reasonably asking, because the extreme MAGA Republicans right now temporarily hold the gavels in the House of Representatives. Last question.
Thanks, Leader. There's been a lot of talk about blame from both sides, but I'm wondering if the two sides reach a deal and we avoid default, will you give Speaker McCarthy credit for that?
Right now, we're focused on making sure that we protect the health, the safety, the economic well-being of the American people, that America pays our bills, that we don't dangerously default. But what is clear to me increasingly is that many extreme MAGA Republicans have made the political calculation that a dangerous default and crashing the economy and triggering a recession is in their political interests. That is unpatriotic. But that's not speculation on the part of Democrats. That is what extreme MAGA Republicans continue to say out loud, including most recently the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee.
And do you think negotiators should be in the room right now?
It's my understanding that the designees of both President Biden as well as Speaker McCarthy will continue to talk, but it is unfortunate that House Republicans have chosen to get out of town before sundown when we are facing a dangerous default and the possibility of our economy crashing. Last question, thanks.
Following up on artificial intelligence, I know you had a meeting with the speaker this week. You said you were to come stay tuned. I'm wondering if you could give us an update on what to expect on that front. And are you concerned given punting on appropriations, NDAA, all of the must-pass bills, that artificial intelligence is going to get squeezed from the legislative agenda?
Well, it's my hope that we're going to be able to find a path forward in terms of working on the artificial intelligence issue in a bipartisan way. Speaker McCarthy has been a partner in that regard in terms of his vision and his leadership for addressing the challenges that we will confront as a nation around the development and explosive growth of AI in a bipartisan way. And I think we're going to be able to continue to work together as Democrats and Republicans to be able to find some common ground and take some legislative steps forward, hopefully in the months to come, to strike the right balance between making sure that the United States maintains its competitive advantage on artificial intelligence and allows for the development of the technology in ways that can be beneficial to humanity, particularly in areas like healthcare and disease prevention and eradication, while at the same time making sure that we can impose some guardrails that would allow for the prevention of bad actors from stepping into the artificial intelligence arena, taking advantage of the technology to inflict harm on the American people. That's a balance that I think we have to strike, and I'm encouraged and optimistic that we're going to be able to find the common ground. Speaker McCarthy has been very clear in wanting to work together with Democrats on this issue, and I look forward to what's to come. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. McCarthy is now saying that he wants to work with the Senate to make some type of border provisions. What do you make of that?
It's too little, too late. All we have to do right now in the House is when the bipartisan continuing resolution leaves the Senate and comes over to the House, it should be put on the House floor for an up or down vote, so we can end the nightmare of this possible extreme MAGA Republican government shutdown. The Republicans want to shut down the government because they want to cut Social Security, slash public school funding, and criminalize abortion care. That's why America is at risk of having to endure a government shutdown, because the top line spending numbers were already negotiated at the insistence of the Republicans in the House. This is an important point. They threatened a catastrophic default on America's debt. And in exchange for avoiding that catastrophic default, said we want to negotiate appropriations numbers, demanded that that occur. Led by President Biden, there were negotiations to avoid a catastrophic default and to include top-line appropriations numbers in an agreement that was passed by both the House and the Senate in overwhelming numbers, sent to the president's desk, signed into law. Less than a week after that statute being enacted, Republicans broke their word and turned their back on the agreement that they themselves negotiated. Why? Because they want to jam their extreme ideology down the throats of the American people by doing things like cutting Social Security, or criminalizing abortion care, or slashing public school funding. That's why we're in this manufactured Republican crisis, where they may shut the government down to hurt everyday Americans as part of a temper tantrum designed to extract these policy concessions that they know they can't otherwise get through the normal legislative process. That's the problem that we're in right now. There's one simple way out. The bipartisan spending bill that is pending in the Senate right now, that the overwhelming majority of Democrats and a significant number of Republicans supported in a vote of about 79 to 17. When that bill arrives in the House, put it on the floor for an up or down vote, and we will avoid a government shutdown. Thank you.
Leader Jeffries, a word?
This is a serious, solemn, and sober moment. House Democrats are going to continue to put people over politics and to fight to make life better for everyday Americans. From the very beginning, that has been our objective, and it will continue to be our sole focus, delivering for the American people. We encourage our Republican colleagues who claim to be more traditional to break from the extremists. In the chaos, in the dysfunction, in the extremism, we are ready, willing, and able to work together with our Republican colleagues, but it is on them to join us to move the Congress and the country forward. Thank you.
Kevin McCarthy going to be the speaker after today?
Are they voting against?
Thank you.
Let us through.
Thank you.
Thank you.